Folks, you don't have to hold on much longer because we are back on Santa Clarita's hometown station, AM-1220 KHTS with the Gazette Radio Hour with Doug and usually John, but our special co-host this week is author, former Green Beret, Robert Patrick Lewis, who wrote Love Me When I'm Gone, and his new book coming out called The Pact. Robert, did you happen to watch the State of the Union a couple weeks ago?
I did, and it makes me sad every time I watch it.
well, I was sitting there eating my dinner, and I think it was towards the end of it, and the president came on, and he said, Peter, stay out of this. And he said something to the effect, the biggest challenge or threat to our generations to come is climate change. Above anything else, it's climate change. I about choked on my meatloaf. In fact, I rewound the TiVo, because I want to make sure I heard him right. So I responded, it's in my rant this week in the Santa Clarita Gazette, is, sir, you don't think maybe terrorism might be a threat to kids? Or the $18 trillion debt that might cause economic havoc? What do you think?
Well, those are just the things he doesn't want to talk about, and those are the things he's getting paid to talk about climate change, right? And we don't like to think about it like that. We don't like to think about lobbying as corruption. We don't like to think about the things that lobbyists pay our politicians to say, or the actual legislation that, lobbyists, it's been proven that lobbyists have written legislation word for word that's gone into law in the United States, and it comes along with a $100 million check to a politician. Obama and the left and the Democratic National Committee and a lot of their fundraising comes from these people who profit from climate change being the devil, right? They come from that. That's where they get paid for. And even, that's a problem. I wish I could clone a couple of me to go and research all these things and have one guy be a climate change scientist and another guy just read conspiracy theories and another guy go study physics. I can't, And so some of this stuff, you got to take people at their word that they're an expert and that they're being real. But unfortunately, with so much money in politics and research and in everything today, and propaganda, you can't trust anybody.
So are you saying he didn't mean what he said about climate change being a threat to generations to come?
I'm saying he was laughing all the way to the bank. Right? I'm saying that somebody who makes a lot of money either on green technology or who's making a lot of money from they're profiting some way from climate change being the biggest threat, was paying him for it. Either not paying him directly and not depositing the money directly in his account, but paying for vacations, paying for the Democratic National.
Oh, wait a minute! I thought we paid for his vacations to Hawaii.
Yeah, we paid for most of it, but there's, somebody's got to fund his vacations when he's out of office, right? Somebody's got to send his kids to college. Come on.
Oh, I'm so naive. I never think of this stuff.
It's just to the point. And maybe it's just that I've become too jaded, but you can't trust anybody anymore, right? So I've done a lot of statistics. There's even a book out there titled "How to Make Statistics Say Anything You Want." Right? And that's kind of what it is. People like to use statistics to say, this is going on. I'm a scientist. I'm in a white lab coat. I must know what I'm talking about. But you can use statistics to say anything you want. You can use any study to say anything that you want. And so whenever you hear somebody saying a study like climate change is doing this, or the global temperature has gone up this high, or these things are going on, you have to actually look at the numbers. You got to find out, where did that study come from? So what lab actually did that study? Who funded that study? That's a big thing because they hide that. They don't want you to let you know who funded a study and who kind of essentially nudged these scientists and said, hey, we're paying you. We're going to keep funding you as long as you say what we want you to say. So you got to look at what is the margin of error. What's the statistical margin of error on these studies? You got to look at the mean. You got to look at everything that goes into the study because they can just kind of flub it as much as they want.
Now, I've seen poll after poll about what issues concern Americans the most. And climate change is nowhere near the top of what concerns Americans the most.
Well, one of the things that was great about Steve Jobs was that he didn't wait for consumers to say, I want something. Steve Jobs came up with something and said, you want this. He created it, and people would go, wow, we really do want that. And I feel like Obama thinks he's Steve Jobs. He is. So he's not waiting for us to say what we really want. He's saying, here's this. I'm going to ram it down your throat as hard as I can. And eventually, like that horrible new song on the radio playing on repeat over and over and over, you're going to start going, yeah, you know what? I think that's right. Yeah, climate change is the devil. You're right. 15 people were killed in downtown Chicago yesterday, but climate change, that's what we need to go after.
And what I can't understand, when and I wrote about this in my column a couple weeks ago, he should have looked us right in the camera and said, folks, we have a huge debt problem. We have got to do something about it, and it's going to hurt, and we're going to have to sacrifice, but it's for the good of the country. Well, he didn't even bring that up. And I mean, does he not know? Does he not care? Or does he not understand?
Well, I mean, look at his background, right? So you stay away from things you have no idea about. He obviously doesn't want to keep a cabinet of smart people that'll tell him he's going down the wrong path. He's never had a real job in his life, right? So he was an academic for a very long time. He was a community organizer. He's never actually had a real job. Then he became a politician, right? Furthest thing from, and he was an academic. He was a professor for a while. So he's never done anything that actually required any true idea of fiscal responsibility or how money is made or how jobs are created or actually an understanding of finance. So he doesn't care. All he knows is, I want more money. The Treasury prints more money. We get more money. And that's all he cares about.
The headline today in USA Today was Obama wants a 7% hike in spending.
Yeah. And 7%, you use numbers like that. 7%, 7%, who cares? That's $37 billion extra dollars in non-defense spending and $38 billion in defense spending. 7%, that's a huge 7%.
And I'm sure what drives you crazy drives me crazy. Where does the majority of that money go?
Well, and that's, a big issue that I have. I think I've written about this in my article before. But when people talk about defense spending and people go crazy, they like to say, oh, well, if you cut the defense spending, our soldiers aren't going to have bullets and they're not going to have body armor and they're not going to have MREs. Somebody, I had a business degree before I went in the military. So I would look at just the vast amounts of waste that went into the military and it would just blow my mind. When I was at Bagram in 2013, they had these huge burn pits where they were burning body armor still brand new body armor in the packaging. I had all this medical equipment I needed to get to my Afghan special operations medics, brand new, stretchers, $300 stretchers that they would just throw right in the burn pile. All this stuff, brand new boots, brand new helmets, brand new body armor.
Why?
Because it was cheaper to burn it than to fly it home.
Wow.
And if you look at stimulating the economy, if they burn it there, when all these units come back home, they need to buy new stuff. So it goes back into defense contractors who, again, put a lot of money into political lobbying. So it's just keeping that cycle going. And so when people say we're going to cut down on defense spending, that type of waste has never been addressed because the way the military works, where a commander comes in for 2 years and then they get out, they have no reason to want to make long-term fixes.
I thought this was going to be a nice, fun, relaxing show. You're making my blood pressure go up, man.
I'm all worked up too, man.
All right, folks, we're talking to Robert Patrick Lewis, who's our co-host today on the Gazette Radio Hour. And we're on KHTS, Santa Clarita's hometown station. We'll be right back. We are back, folks, on Santa Clarita's hometown station, AM-1220 KHTS on the Gazette Radio Hour, the radio digest version of the Santa Clarita Gazette and Free Classifieds. And our co-host this week is Robert Patrick Lewis, the author of Love Me When I'm Gone, a new release coming out the pack. And he also is a writer for the one and only Santa Clarita Gazette, which you really appreciate, Robert, your contributions to us most weeks.
It's a lot of fun, but it gets me hot and bothered when I start writing those articles.
Is that why you skipped a week? You didn't want to get worn out?
Yeah, I think I was. My soul was getting a little upset because I see these things, and it really does. I've got 2 kids, and at the end of the day, I just want the world to be a better place for my kids to grow up in.
Now we talked about Mr. Obama saying the greatest threat to our kids is climate change. I think you and I agree that the biggest threat probably could be some sort of social calamity due to economic collapse or whatever. I'd like to get in a little bit about that with you on what that looks like. Because I've had people say to me, I go, are you worried about the economic collapse? And they go, what's the big deal? What could happen? The stock market drops. What are you going to do? The interest rates go up. I'll be okay. Tell us what you think. And tell us what it looks like or what could cause an economic collapse and what it looks like.
So there are a lot of different things that can go into play to do that. One of the things, the value of the dollar, a lot of dollars, since everything in the world is a fiat currency now. So there really are no currencies that are still backed by gold or anything tangible. So they're basically, their value is only inherent on the value that the trust that they create, right? The trust that the United States of America will honor that dollar if something buys it. So a large part of the value of the dollar, of the United States dollar, is that it's the world's reserve currency. That, especially the petrodollar, right? So anybody right now in the world that trades oil, they have to trade it in dollars, right? So it adds a lot of value to the dollar. So they've got to move euros into dollars to buy oil. They have to move dinars into dollars to buy oil. Everything has to do that. Well, China is trying to go away from the dollar as the reserve currency. So if that happens, right? So China and Australia, I think China and Russia no longer trade in dollars. They've created their own form to trade. So if that ever happens, if the world stops trading in dollars, if the petrodollar goes away, funny enough, Gaddafi was trying to go away from the petrodollar. We invaded him within a month, right? So there's a lot of historical events that leaders will try and go away from the petrodollar or try to go away from the dollar's reserve currency, and they're invaded very shortly thereafter because we don't want that.
Interesting.
Right? Yeah, because we know that would essentially destroy the dollar because it's not backed by gold. We owe a ton of money around the world. So it's really one of the last things that's holding the value of the dollar up. So if that collapsed, if we no longer were the reserve currency, all of a sudden the dollar would become kind of useless. We saw it in Zimbabwe where there was intense inflation to the point where it was more fiscally responsible to burn your physical dollars for heat than it was to actually use them. The Deutschmarks is another very famous one where they became just so worthless you would need millions of dollars to buy bread. So if that happens and the dollar becomes worthless, all of a sudden nothing that you have can buy anything. We can't afford anything. It'll throw.
Now, how quickly could that happen? What time span would that take place in?
You know, that's the unfortunate thing is a lot of these people around the world could be making the moves and setting this up without our knowledge. And then one day they announce it. China and Russia or China and Saudi Arabia, if OPEC went away from the petrodollar, if one day OPEC came out on Monday morning at opening bell, they said, hey, we're no longer honoring the petrodollar, it could collapse the next day. It would send our markets into free fall.
What does that look like to our listeners who are sitting at home or driving in their car?
So everybody's very happy right now because gas around $2 a gallon, right? That's insane. Gas has been gone way below what the average has been for a very long time. Well, what happens when it starts going the opposite direction? What happens when it's $30 a gallon? You can't afford gas. You can't afford to drive to work. You can't afford to get to work. Your boss is going to stop paying you. Your boss can't afford to pay you. Let's just say you make $5,000 a month, and all of a sudden that $5,000 a month can't afford to buy milk for the month, right? I know this sounds very outlandish, but in all reality, it would, because a lot of prices would have to go up a lot more substantially and a lot more quickly than your pay would come in. Or, you know, your bank account. Let's just say you have $200,000 in savings that you've been saving for your retirement, and all of a sudden that's not even enough to last you 6 months, right? Hyperinflation, where all of a sudden everything costs so much money, your dollar does not go very far. Then all of a sudden you get these people that work for social services. So the people that run the water, the people that run, you know, your natural gas lines to your house, the people that run all of these social services that keep our country going every day. Well, if they're not getting paid anymore, are they going to come to work? Do you think they're going to come to work and keep the electricity flowing in your house, the sewage lines going? Do you think if a guy's not getting paid, he's going to go climb down a manhole into the depths of the sewer to stop a blockage that's backing up your toilets? No, that's not going to happen. And the thing that we've talked about before offline is that when that happens, there's a very short window to when all of society breaks down. When people get thirsty, when your toilets start backing up, when you can't get water out of the faucet, when you can't take a shower, people stop being nice. They stop all social constructs. The social contract just completely goes away. Every special operations combat veteran I know is quote unquote a prepper now. That's why we have.
What's a prepper?
Prepper is somebody that's preparing for whatever it may be. Invasion in my terms, social collapse. Here in Southern California, an earthquake that destroys the highways, and so you have no way to get out of your neighborhood. The water shuts down, the gas lines shut down, right? You basically lose everything. A prepper is somebody who has food stored. A smart one has ammunition and weapons stored. Possibly gold stored. Some people have gold because they're preparing for the collapse of the dollar. But they just have preparations in store to where they can last a week, a month, a year, 10 years without any of these social services going into place.
Now, would the grocery stores have groceries?
For a couple hours.
For a couple hours.
For a couple hours. But once everybody realizes what's going on, those people that aren't prepared, and even those of us preppers that do have this stuff stored, you still want to get everything you can get.
And let's back up for our listeners. What we're talking about is something that is very real that could happen because of the economic situation here and throughout the world.
Yeah, well, economics would be something like hyperinflation. But here in Southern California, we're especially prone to earthquakes that could shut down the entire grid. I mean, if you think about out here in Santa Clarita where we are, it it would be very easy to cut us off from LA proper. An earthquake that split, the 5, that just split the 5 in half. The Northridge earthquake shut down the 101 and the 10, right? You basically all travel was shut off in Los Angeles. That could happen to us very quickly. So what happens when 18-wheelers can't get in with food? The sewer lines, the water lines are shut down, bringing water into Santa Clarita.
Right.
All of a sudden, there's
another
left.
uplifting segment.
But hey, the weather's nice today.
It's beautiful. All right, everybody, we'll be back with Robert Patrick Lewis, our special co-host this week on the Gazette Radio Hour on Santa Clarita's hometown station, AM-1220. Back in a minute.